So let's start now. So we're going to start with the presentation of Mr. James Benedict C. Malabanan. Now, may I request if I play the video, if you can hear it well, okay? Thank you.
Good day, everyone. And so for today's presentation, I will be discussing the tradition of community custodianship of the image of San Juan Nepomuceno de Malibay, venerated at St. John Nepomuceno Parish, Malibay, Pasay City. So we will begin. And so, for the past 500 years, we have seen that popular piety that was fostered by the Filipino Catholics have nourished the Catholic faith in the country. That is, from here, that communities and cultures were developed and created their identity over the centuries, from different Holy Week traditions, the manner Filipinos celebrated Christmas, the plethora of Marian devotions that each city and province fostered and celebrated, the devotion to the Child Jesus and the Black Nazarene, and of course, the colorful fiesta celebrations. These kinds of devotions and practices help not only in preserving the Catholic faith in the islands, but also help in shaping our culture and identity as Filipinos. Such is the case in the historic district of Malibay in Pasay City, where the devotion to San Juan Nepomuceno became an integral part of their history and culture, that the devotion helped shape the community's identity and culture, and the community devised means to foster and preserve this long-standing devotion to their patron saint. So let us first introduce the patron saint of the district. Saint John Nepomuceno, or San Juan Nepomuceno, was born in 1330 to poor parents in Bohemia, Czech Republic, where his parents consecrated him to God in thanksgiving of his birth. He would later become a priest and was appointed as a chaplain to the court of Emperor Wenceslas, where he converted numbers of by his preaching and example, including his wife, the Empress. The Empress would seek help from him since she suffered much from her husband's baseless jealousy and would often advise her to rid the However, Emperor Wenceslas grew more suspicious with his wife that he tried to extort Father John to reveal her confessions, to which he refused because of the seal of confession. Because of his resistance, the emperor threw St. John in prison and was tortured until he met his death by throwing him to the Vitavia River in Prague in 1393. As he died, the people saw heavenly light and 5 stars shining on the river, and the people found the remains of the holy priest and given a funeral accorded to a saint. A few years later, Wenceslas was deposed and died an impenitent and miserable death. St. John Nepomuceno was beatified in 1721 and was canonized by Pope Benedict XIII in 1729. His feast is celebrated every May 16 and known as the Martyr of the Seal of Confession. Now, how the devotion arrived in Malibay in Pasay City? It is not certain when the devotion to St. John Nepomuceno of Malibay began, yet it is believed by the people of Malibay that the devotion began when an 18th century image of San Juan Nepomuceno was brought by a Spanish family who resided in Malibay for their private devotion. But when the family returned to Spain, they left the image, and the townsfolk took it as a sign that the image wanted to stay in Malibay to be its patron. Malibay was once part of jurisdiction of Baclaran, Parañaque by 1898, and the Malibay Visita was established in 1956 by Archbishop Jeremias Hardy. The parish of San Roque was established in 1953, and Malibay was placed under its jurisdiction until the parish of San Juan Nepomuceno was established on June 15, 1963. The devotees of San Juan Nepomuceno de Malibay have this tradition where they would take turns on the custodianship of the venerated image of Tata Juan, as they would have often call him, and have it enshrined in their homes and let devotees visit them. The custodian is called the hermano, and the hermano is in charge of the care and safety of the image for the whole year until a new one will be chosen by the comite de festejos. Such tradition, according to devotees, began where it was when it was told that when it was decided to permanently enshrine the image of Tata Juan in the parish, the people will find an empty urn every night, and tiny footsteps are seen in the streets leading to different houses. This was taken as a sign that he wanted to visit every household to bless them. The hermano, or a member of its family, would also need to shuttle the image to the parish church every day, hours before the offering of the Holy Mass, so that the parishioners would venerate the image, especially on Thursdays, the devotional day dedicated to Tata Juan. The hermano's family would take turns on guarding the image while it is enshrined to its designated altar in the parish, and the parish in turn sets up a special place for the hermano's family for this purpose. After the mass for the day and was done, and the parishioners paid their homage to their patron, the hermano's family would take back the image to their home, and they will open it again, their homes, to the devotees who wish to venerate them until the end of the day. The families in Malibay considered the role of an hermano as a privilege and honor to be the caretaker of Tata Juan for a year, for they would always recount numerous miracles through his intercession, especially during the days where the image stayed in their homes. We see in this tradition how Filipinos venerate the saints, where they were treated as a friend and a go-to person in times of need, that most Filipinos would deliberately perform such actions, gestures, and practices that often are not connected to the traditional liturgy, yet it is tolerated by the church as a pious act of veneration to the saints, like the wiping of images, offering ex votos, among others. Now we will proceed on the role of the selection of an hermano, okay, through the process of this kind of gatekeeping method, okay. So the role of an hermano may be considered an honor and a privilege to the people of Malibay. However, there were qualifications that were imposed for this to have such privilege to be obtained. The community, especially the comite de festejos, have this method on choosing the hermano or custodian for the image, where they would conduct an interview to the person who is interested for the role to determine if the person meets the following criteria. If the person's immediate family or a relative should be an actual resident or married or related to someone from Malibay. The community have these specific qualifications to ensure the preservation of this particular tradition. Once the committee determined and confirmed the interest of the person's familial affinity to the town of Malibay, they would cast their names in the draw lots on the days before the fiesta or days after, in the hopes that they would be chosen as a hermano for San Juan Nepomuceno. This method that the Comite de Festejos that was devised in safeguarding the tradition clearly shows the comite as gatekeepers of the said tradition, because they wanted to preserve it the way their ancestors observed it, and they did not want any foreign elements or practices to creep in that might alter it altogether, unless there were circumstances that may prompt these changes to the existing tradition. The preservation and continuity of the tradition lies on two things: community effort and a panata. Community effort is at play in the continuity of the tradition, where through the active participation of the community in the practicing and preservation of the tradition shows how that they were able to show their appreciation to it, that they would do all these things to preserve it in the name of faith. These acts are also an indicator of the enculturation of the Catholic faith, where in a study made by His Excellency Bishop Mylo Hubert Vergara, Diocese of Pasig, he notes that some helpful elements and religious expressions were retained and became enculturated, especially in the form of local customs and popular devotions. These expressions of love towards God are more visible and experiential through these popular devotions. In this case, it was through the veneration and the devotion to the saints that they expressed their love for God through the practices of this tradition that would lead to develop a community panata. The concept of panata of this tradition is also at work in the continuity of the tradition because they view it as a vow to their patron in order to give gratitude for the favors granted and the protection provided in the community. The characteristic of a panata has been in the case in numerous popular devotions in the Philippines that they were rooted in the concept of thanksgiving and interestingly to a belief that good day everyone, seal of confession. Now,
Sorry
how the
about that.
devotion
Wait
arrived in Malibay in Pasay City for their private devotion. But when the family returned to Spain, they left the image and the townsfolk took it as a sign. It was told that when it was decided to permanently
Sorry po, I have to play again the video. I think it's 9 minutes where it stopped.
Catholic faith, where in a study made by His Excellency Bishop Mylo Hubert Vergara, Diocese of Pasig, he notes that some helpful elements and religious expressions were retained and became enculturated, especially in the form of local customs and popular devotions. These expressions of love towards God are more visible and experiential through these popular devotions. In this case, it was through the veneration and the devotion to the saints that they expressed their love for God through the practices of this tradition because they view it as a vow to their patron in order to give gratitude for the favors granted and the protection provided in the community. The characteristic of a panata has been in the case in numerous popular devotions in the Philippines that they were rooted in the concept of thanksgiving and interestingly to a belief that the density of the sacred power of the patron saint is abundantly manifested and felt during the commemoration of the saint's feast day. In the panata, we see clearly the concept of utang na loob, where we see the feeling of being indebted moves oneself to religiously observe acts of devotion as a form of payment to the debt, which became a driving force on the performance of a certain panata that helped in the continuity and preservation of the tradition. The endurance of the tradition showed how enculturation worked to keep the Catholic faith intact, that it creates a unique culture that helps in forming the cultural identity of the place or locality. In recent years, in order to keep the community tradition alive, the tradition of the community custodianship at present is currently being applied to the image of Santo Niño de Malibay, and for the selection of the hermano, children were allowed to participate as a method of teaching children the tradition that not only help them nourish their Catholic faith, but also to help them keep their identity and culture intact. In the study of the tradition of community custodianship as a form of devotion to San Juan Nepomuceno de Malibay, we see that this long tradition shows as an example of Philippine popular devotion in terms of its personal nature. Having this personal attachment to the patron saint in this manner shows how Filipino Catholics look and understood the veneration of saints in our context on reaching the divine in our personal fashion, while keeping in mind what the magisterium teaches on this matter. What keeps the tradition alive are the gatekeeping method that the comite de festejos devised to ensure that the authenticity of the tradition, the eagerness of the entire Catholic community of Malibay to participate and to take part of the tradition that was born out of a panata, and how the recent years the tradition opened itself to a younger generation of Malibay Catholics though to a different image to ensure its longevity and continuity for a long period of time. The manner of preservation of the pious tradition of Malibay lends to the formation of a unique culture that shaped the cultural identity of the historic district of Malibay, Pasay City, that it honors its patron saint and protector, San Juan Nepomuceno.
O sabi mo, ano kainin? Sinishare mo
And
ba?
this concludes my presentation on the tradition of community custodianship of the image of San Juan Nepomuceno de Malibay that is venerated at St. John Nepomuceno Parish, Malibay, Pasay City. Thank you so much. And if you wanted to know more or to check out on my blog, you can go to pintakasiph.wordpress.com. If you wanted to know more about our my documentation on Philippine popular devotions and also some historical tidbits in Filipino Catholic history. So thank you so much and have a great day ahead.